Week 3 is officially in the book. Week 4 is fastly approaching, and you maybe have some players injured. Bye weeks are also coming up here very soon. I'm bringing you 6 start wide receivers and 3 sit wide receivers going into week 4. As always, I like to say, relax. There's still plenty of time. You know, maybe you're 1-2, maybe you're 2-1, maybe you're 3-0, undefeated, or you're 0-3. Still plenty of time. Let's dive deep into some of these start sits and relax. And on number 1, we have Amari Cooper versus the Atlanta Falcons. He did his thing this past week. 7 receptions, 11 targets, over 100 yards on that Thursday night game versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. Over 23 fantasy points. Look, he's going against the Atlanta Falcons, who give up the 4th most points to wide receivers. We just saw what Geno did with Tyler Lockett and DK. And I think Amari Cooper and Jacoby Brissett, it's clear that Amari Cooper is the number 1 guy. No one else is stepping up outside of David Njoku in the passing game. So if you can get Amari Cooper into your starting lineup, why not? This is what you need to do going into week 4. And at number 2, I have Gabe Davis versus the Baltimore Ravens. Last week, we didn't really see him. Zach might have been right. He might have been a decoy versus the Miami Dolphins. I don't think he was 100%. He caught 3 out of 6 targets, just over 6 fantasy points. Look, and I think the difference is that the Ravens give up the most fantasy points to the wide receiver position. We saw what Mac Jones did against the Ravens, giving Devontae Parker. He was like a top 10 wide receiver. He had like over 23 fantasy points. Gabe Davis could be the guy here as well this week. I think he will be 100% moving into this game. He should be practicing in full this week. If there is some setbacks or questions, then maybe we have to come back and reconsider this. But once again, the Ravens give up the most fantasy points to the wide receiver position. Lamar Jackson can score with this team, and the Buffalo Bills just coming off a terrible loss, a heartbreaker versus Miami. You saw how exhausted they were. They need to bounce back, and they're going to put all their firepower onto the field. So start Gabe Davis in week 4. And at number 3, we have 2 players. I'm giving you some bonuses: DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett going against the Detroit Lions. DK Metcalf last week, 5 receptions, 12 targets, over 17 fantasy points, and he had a touchdown. Tyler Lockett, 9 receptions for 11 targets, didn't have a touchdown, but had over 16 fantasy points. That was against the Atlanta Falcons, who gave up the 4th most fantasy points to the wide receiver position. But now the Lions gave up the 7th most fantasy points to the wide receiver position. And I think what Geno did here, where you see the comfortability that he has, the chemistry that he's building week in and week out with both of these guys. And I wasn't excited about starting these guys, in the early parts of the season, which is the last 3 weeks essentially. But moving forward, I guess if you have DK and Lockett, it feels like a good must-start opportunities if you do have them, if you don't have other options. Once again, the Lions give up the 7 most fantasy points to the wide receiver position. They're playing in Detroit, so if Geno can get into a rhythm, and we saw, Walker, one of their safeties for the Lions, did tear his Achilles, so they're going to be down a starter. Why not start DK Lockett and DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, combine that, DK and Lockett versus the Detroit Lions. And at number 4, we have Chris Olave, the man himself, the man, the myth, the legend. He went off versus the Carolina Panthers. 9 receptions for 13 targets, 147 yards. Let me say that again. 147 yards, over 23 fantasy points. I mean, how can you not start him moving forward? I don't know if you guys watched our trade away video. Zach said it himself. He could be a top 15 wide receiver moving forward, a top 24 for the rest of the season. Zach has said, go watch that video. Don't mark my words, but I think it was along those lines. Chris Olave is the guy. Michael Thomas is down. Jarvis Landry is down. If they're all in question going into week 4 against the Minnesota Vikings, then I think there could be an opportunity for Chris Olave to really take off. The Vikings give it the 15 most fantasy points to the wide receiver position. So why not start Chris Olave in the wide receiver 2, maybe flex option if you do have it. Chris Olave, week 4. And at number 5, we have Brandon Cooks versus the Los Angeles Chargers. I think this is a good start opportunity for Brandon Cooks. The past 2 weeks, he hasn't been the best. He's been targeted in the combined 17 targets in the past 2 weeks, but he only caught 6 of those 17 targets in the past 2 weeks. So if he can really bounce back, Denver has a good secondary with Patrick Surtain. Chicago Bears surprisingly enough, give up the 10th least amount of points to the wide receiver position, but he is playing the Los Angeles Chargers, who surprisingly give up the 6th most points to the wide receiver position. And I know they have Derwin James and everyone in that secondary, which should be really good, and they should be bullying, Davis Mills and Brandon Cooks. But as always, this is just a bad offense that is just going to result in volume. And Justin Herbert hasn't been playing his best. The defense hasn't been playing their best either. Once again, 6 more fantasy points to the wide receivers. So if Brandon Cooks can really have a massive bounce back here in week 4, I think it will be a fantastic. I am believing for the bounce back. So believe in the bounce back. Once again, 6 most fantasy points to the wide receiver the Chargers give. Start Brandon Cooks. And my last start sit option for you guys this week is Greg Dortch from the Arizona Cardinals. He is playing the Carolina Panthers. These past 3 weeks, he's been surprising. I think this is what they wanted Rondale Moore to be for, Kyler Murray in this offense. Week 1, over 13 fantasy points, 9 targets. Week 2, 15 points. He did score a touchdown. He only caught 4 targets. Week 3 against the Rams, he caught 9 out of 10 targets for over 17 fantasy points. Now they play the Carolina Panthers, who is kind of decent. They give the full 14 most points to the wide receiver position. I guess they're kind of in that middle of the pack range in defense. But, AJ Green is struggling with injury. Hollywood Brown is getting hyper targeted. He's going to be covered by J.C. Horn. And this team needs somebody to step up. And once again, DeAndre Hopkins is out and AJ Green's in question. What's going to happen? Greg Dortch has been the guy, and Rondale Moore, I think, is not going to be playing moving forward until more reports come out. I'm pretty sure he will miss week 4, but Greg Dortch is the guy moving forward. So start him with confidence if you need a good flex option moving forward. My first sit candidate is Batey City, Rashad Bateman versus the Buffalo Bills. He's been doing good, but he's not getting the target share that we all expected him to get. We thought he would get hyper targeted, but that's not the case. Week 1 and 2, over 12 fantasy points in each game, which has been great. He's been scoring touchdowns, but the targets is not there. Week 1, 5 targets. Week 2, 7 targets. And week 3, 4 targets. It's not exciting to start Bateman, especially versus the Bills, who give it the 9th least fantasy points to the wide receiver position. And I know everyone's saying, well, the Bills, just gave Waddle a lot of those receiving yards, but they also held Tyreek Hill to only 33 yards, 4 targets, under 5 fantasy points. And Bateman is really the only wide receiver threat there outside of, I guess you can say, Mark Andrews, who is a tight end, but he's still like the number 1 target there. So I'm sitting Rashad Bateman just this week, just to see how he goes. I think there's other options. There's better options for you out there starting for week 4. So sit Rashad Bateman. My second sit wide receiver is Allen Robinson, who's playing the San Francisco 49ers, and this could be a trap, to be completely honest. I'll be honest with you. I'm tossing up to start or sit Allen Robinson in multiple leagues, but if you have a better matchup-based wide receiver, then I would be starting them over Allen Robinson, but I won't be surprised if Allen Robinson finds the end zone. If you watch that Arizona Cardinals game versus the Rams, Allen Robinson dropped 2 passes, he dropped 1 touchdown that went right through his hands. The other one, Matthew Stafford overthrew him a little bit. But the fact that he's not getting the targets is what's concerning. That is so concerning. Week 1, we all saw non-existent, only had 2 targets. Week 2, he had a better game with 5 targets, but he did score the touchdown. He had over 15 fantasy points. And then week 3, 5 targets, under 5 fantasy points. Doesn't seem exciting. Now he's going against the San Francisco 49ers, who give up the 3rd least amount of points to the wide receiver position. I am not excited to start Allen Robinson. I understand if you have him and you're probably tossing up. And once again, like I said, this could be a trap game where he could find the end zone, where they could be really trying to eliminate Cooper Kupp, which feels like it can never happen. But maybe Allen Robinson can find the end zone this week, and maybe that's what can save him again. But if you do have other options, I will be sitting Allen Robinson. My last start sit wide receiver is a group, and that's the Tennessee Titans wide receiver core versus the Indianapolis Colts. So I'm sitting Treylon Burks and Roberto Woods. We saw Treylon Burks completely non-existent in week 3, and Roberto Woods, he had a decent game, 9 targets, over 12 fantasy points. I'm not trusting either one of these guys right now. I love the Treylon Burks hype, and I think he is extremely talented. But against these Colts, who give up the 7th least amount of points to the fantasy wide receiver room, I think it's significant. And if you saw what they did to the Kansas City Chiefs, they put kind of, Patrick Mahomes in check outside of Travis Kelce, but the wide receiver group specifically, outside of Juju, to be fair, Juju had over 13 fantasy points, which was great, but McCole Hardman, only 1 catch, 1.2 fantasy points, and then MVS, only 8.8 fantasy points. So they had this wide receiver core kind of in check, and I think Patrick Mahomes and these Chiefs are a little bit better, and they have a little bit of a better wide receiver room. I do believe Treylon Burks is fantastic, but I don't know if I want to go and start Treylon Burks in week 4. And this is a crucial week, especially if you need to win. Maybe you're 1-2, maybe you're 0-3, whatever the case may be, and you need to win. I will be sitting this Titans wide receivers against the Colts, once again, who give up the 7th least fantasy points to the wide receiver position. So I'm sitting the Titans wide receiver group. Guys, these are my start-sit wide receivers for week 4. Like I always say, keep calm. There's still plenty of time. You win your league at the waiver wires in your start sits, who you believe in. So keep an eye out. Comment down below if I missed out on anyone. If you have any questions, we go live at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Saturday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time every Saturday. So come through. We answer every single one of your questions, and good luck in week 4.
Yo, what's good? Thanks for watching. We got a lot more videos.
A lot more.
If you want more videos,
watch it.
You can also subscribe
right now
if you want to.
You need to.
And lastly, don't forget that you can sign up to support the show and get exclusive content by going to patreon.com/FantasyLand fam.